The limousine door slammed shut with a force that didn't match the delicate hands behind it. Avery Lockhart, Manhattan's most notorious tech heiress, sat in the back seat in a designer gown that clung to her like silk on fire, her lips red as war and her expression carved from ice. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, hesitant. "Miss Lockhart, the wedding. Are you sure you want to go?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the screen of her phone where a photo of her ex-fiancé saved the date, glittered with fake happiness. "Yes," she said finally, her voice low. "I just need a date first." Her eyes flicked out the window, landing on the same bench she passed every morning. Today, someone else was sitting there, not the usual faces. No, this woman was different. She looked like a knife in a world full of spoons. Dirty, yes, but upright, defiant. She was reading a crumpled book under the gray October sky like it owed her something. Avery opened the door and stepped out, her heels clacking like threats against the sidewalk. The woman didn't look up until Avery stood right in front of her, shadows stretching long over cracked concrete. "You can't be serious," the woman said without even asking what Avery wanted. "Oh, but I am," Avery replied, already smirking. "How would you like to ruin a wedding with me?" The woman raised an eyebrow, slowly closing the book. "You high or just heartbroken?" "Both, probably. But I have a dress that would fit you. A hotel suite with a hot shower and an ex who deserves to choke on her own perfect life. Come with me. Be my +1. I'll pay you enough to disappear afterward." The woman's stare didn't waver. "You think I'm for sale? Aren't we all?" Avery's voice was cold, cruel even. But inside her chest, something fluttered, a spark of curiosity, or maybe madness. The woman stood slow and deliberate. She was taller than Avery expected, not in height, but in presence. "Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. What's your name?" she asked. "Avery figures. Mine's Sloane." Avery tilted her head. "Sloane, what? Just Sloane? That a problem?" "No, just unexpected. Welcome to my world." 20 minutes later, Sloane stepped out of the limousine bathroom in a black floor-length gown that hugged her in places. That made Avery's mouth dry. Her hair, now wet and slicked back, revealed sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes that didn't belong to anyone Avery should have underestimated. "Jesus," Avery muttered more to herself than to anyone else. "You clean up dangerous. Is that a compliment?" Sloane asked, tugging at the neckline. "It's a warning." Avery's voice dropped as she poured them both a glass of champagne. "To chaos," she offered, glass raised. "To whatever the hell this is," Sloane replied, clinking it. At the wedding, all eyes turned the moment they walked in. Avery knew how to make an entrance, but this wasn't just about her anymore. Sloane moved like a question no one had the answer to, all effortless confidence and unbothered mystery. People whispered. Avery's ex, Camilla Ravenshaw, her former business partner, former lover, and current object of bitter resentment, froze mid-toast when she saw them. Avery smiled sweetly. "Looks like we're right on time. You didn't tell me she was gorgeous," Sloane said, eyes narrowed. "I didn't want to scare you off. Too late." Camilla stormed over within seconds, white gown flowing like arrogance. "Avery," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "This is unexpected." "You never liked predictable," Avery replied, taking Sloane's hand and lacing their fingers. Sloane raised an eyebrow, but didn't pull away. Camilla's eyes flicked to the contact, lips twitching. "And who is this?" "This is my girlfriend," Avery lied smoothly. "Sloane?" Camilla blinked. "Girlfriend? Yes, you moved on. And I moved on, though clearly I traded up." Camilla's smile cracked for a millisecond. "Well, enjoy the evening. Try not to make a scene." "Oh," Sloane said, finally speaking. "We wouldn't dream of it." But Avery knew that tone. That tone promised fire. As they walked to their table, Sloane leaned in. "You just made me your fake girlfriend. You sure you can handle that? Are you asking if I can fake being into a beautiful woman for one night?" Avery whispered back, lips almost brushing her ear. "I think I'll survive." "Good, because I don't do things halfway." Something passed between them then. Not a smile, not yet, but something that pulled tighter than it should have. Later that night, when Camilla danced with her new wife under the chandeliers, Avery felt the weight of Sloane's hand on her thigh beneath the table, casual and electric. She didn't move it. She didn't want to. "You're really committing to the role," Avery murmured. Sloane's mouth curled into a smirk. "You started the game. I just played to win." Avery looked at her like she was seeing her for the first time. This wasn't just a stunt anymore, and that terrified her more than Camilla ever could. Sloane had never seen herself like this, reflected in golden mirrors, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, wearing a dress that cost more than she'd made in a year. Back when she still had jobs before everything spiraled, she looked dangerous, untouchable, like the kind of woman no one dared underestimate. And yet, when she glanced sideways at Avery, she felt like the imposter again. Avery was effortless, ice and elegance, lips painted sharp, every movement calculated. But Sloane had been watching her closely. Avery drank too slowly, smiled too fast when people approached. And her eyes. Those eyes never stayed still. She was breaking under the surface. Sloane could see it. And maybe that's why she hadn't walked away. Not just for the money, or the dress, or the promise of chaos, but because beneath Avery's polished cruelty, there was pain that matched her own. "Why are you really doing this?" Sloane asked, voice low, fingers tracing the rim of her champagne glass. Avery didn't look at her. "Revenge is a dish best served in satin." "That's cute, but I don't buy it." Now Avery turned, eyes meeting hers with a flash of challenge. "Don't overthink it, Sloane. I needed a date. You were available, right?" Sloane said, smiling without warmth. "Because I'm just another project for you to dress up and use." Avery's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The silence hung heavy between them until Sloane leaned in, her voice dropping into something that crackled with heat. "You can lie to them, Avery, but don't lie to me." Before Avery could reply, Camilla reappeared. Her presence was like the sudden drop in temperature before a storm. "Sloane," she said smoothly, "would you mind if I stole Avery for a moment? Old time's sake." Sloane looked at Avery. "Is this where I pretend to be jealous?" Avery stood. "Only if you feel like playing dirty." But Sloane didn't answer. She just leaned back, eyes narrowing, and watched Avery walk off with the woman who'd shattered her. Camilla led Avery to a quiet alcove near the garden doors. Soft classical music floated in the background, but the tension between them was anything but soft. "You always didn't know how to make an entrance," Camilla said, her smile brittle. "You always didn't know how to ruin lives," Avery shot back. Camilla tilted her head. "You brought a homeless woman to my wedding, Avery. That's low, even for you. Don't pretend to care about her. She's worth 10 of you." Camilla's eyes sparked. "Are you sleeping with her?" "Not that it's any of your business, but maybe I will." Avery stepped closer, venom in every breath. "Why, jealous of her?" Camilla laughed short and cruel. "Please, she's just a distraction. You don't even know her. You're using her to prove a point." Avery's voice turned cold. "And what exactly am I proving? That you're not over me." The silence that followed was dangerous. Avery didn't answer, didn't blink, just turned and walked away. Back at the table, Sloane was gone. Avery swept the room, brushing off greetings and stares until she spotted her, solitary at the edge of the ballroom beside the open garden door. A cigarette rested between her fingers, even though she never smoked. The night breeze tugged her hair, and she looked like a half-finished portrait. Avery moved closer. "You don't smoke." Needed an excuse to breathe. Sloane didn't look at her. "How was your sweet reunion?" "Toxic," Sounds right. Avery paused. I'm sorry about earlier. She crawls under my skin. She's still there, Sloane murmured softly. But that isn't my burden, is it? Avery stepped in, lowering her voice. Why did you actually say yes? Sloane turned then, meeting her eyes with something unguarded and true. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to matter, even if only for a night. It landed harder than Avery expected. You do matter, she said before she could stop herself. You matter more than she ever did. Sloane's laugh went bitter. You don't know me, then let me. The space between them thinned. The air tilted. Sloane watched her, eyes unreadable. You're playing a dangerous game. Then play it with me. Avery's fingers brushed Sloane's, barely touching. But it was enough. Enough to make Sloane draw a sharp breath. Enough to make Avery forget everything except the nearness of her mouth. You're not the only one who's lost things, Avery whispered. You think I'm whole? You think I sleep at night? Sloane's voice was rough. Then why do you act like nothing touches you? Because if I let it touch me, I'll come apart. A pause, a heartbeat, and then Sloane leaned in just far enough for her lips to hover near Avery's cheek. Her breath, a promise. Don't fall apart tonight. Fall into me instead. Avery didn't answer. She only let Sloane draw her into the garden's shadows where the music couldn't reach, where the noise bled out and only the rhythm of their breathing remained. There, beneath the faint glow of hanging lights, Sloane kissed her. Not gently, not cautiously, but with the hunger and rage of someone who hadn't been wanted in far too long. Avery answered like a match struck to gasoline. It wasn't tender, it wasn't careful, but it was real. And it was enough to make Avery forget why she had come here in the first place. When they finally broke apart, Sloane's thumb skimmed the corner of Avery's mouth. Tell me this isn't pretend. Avery looked at her, breathing hard. I don't know what this is, but it isn't pretend. Sloane's smile was almost sad. That's the truest thing you've said all night. Then she turned and slipped back inside, leaving Avery alone beneath the trees, stunned, breathless, wondering when exactly she surrendered control of the game she thought she was running. Avery didn't return at once. She stood in the garden like the wind had hollowed her out, the echo of Sloane's mouth still burning on hers. She had orchestrated every piece of tonight, the dress, the entrance, the performance, but nothing about that kiss had been scripted. Nothing about Sloane had ever lived inside a tidy little box. And now she was everywhere. In Avery's lungs, in her skin, in the chaos rising again inside her chest. When she finally stepped back into the ballroom, the music had swelled into something louder. Bodies moving like they were trying to erase themselves. Avery's gaze hunted for Sloane and found her, of course, alone, leaning on the bar, one elbow on the counter, entirely unfazed by the extravagant crowd. And of course, someone else had noticed already. A man in a deep navy suit, smiling too wide, leaning too close. Avery's mouth tightened. She took a slow, steady breath, waiting. She crossed the room in for sharp strides. Everything okay here? She asked, her voice light but edged. Sloane didn't even look at the man when she answered. It was. He raised his hands, smirking. Didn't know she was spoken for. She is, Avery replied, slipping a hand around Sloane's waist with a possessiveness she didn't bother hiding. The man walked off and Sloane turned to her, eyebrow raised. Jalouse. Protective. Avery shot back. Same thing, Sloane said, her smirk half shadow, half challenge. Avery didn't respond. She was too busy noticing how close they were again. How natural it felt to touch her like that. How the scent of her skin was already a drug. Come with me, she said suddenly. Where? Away from all of this. She didn't wait for an answer. She just took Sloane's hand and led her out of the ballroom down a corridor lit with soft sconces and whispers. They ended up in an empty reception room, all marble and mirrors, forgotten for the night. The moment the door clicked shut, the energy between them snapped. Sloane crossed her arms. Is this your thing? Run away from uncomfortable emotions by making out in expensive rooms. No, Avery said, walking closer. My thing is losing control around you. Sloane didn't back away, then lose it. It wasn't a kiss this time. It was a slow surrender. Avery reached out like someone unsure for once, like she needed permission. And Sloane gave it, her hand rising to cup Avery's cheek. Her thumb stroking once before their mouths met again. Softer now, slower, like they were both afraid of what they'd started. Avery's hands found Sloane's waist. Sloane's fingers tangled in the soft waves of Avery's hair. And for a long moment, there was nothing else. Just them. Just breath and want and something neither of them could name yet. When they pulled apart, Sloane didn't speak. She just looked at Avery like she was starting to see past the layers. You're not what I expected, she said finally. Avery gave a weak laugh. You expected a spoiled __ I expected someone who didn't flinch when touched. Avery blinked. Did I flinch? Sloane nodded. Every time I get too close. It's not because of you. I know that silence was louder than anything. Then Avery sat on the edge of the long marble table, exhaling hard. I built this life to never need anyone again. I wasn't going to let anyone close enough to break me like she did. Sloane moved slowly toward her. And now I'm wondering if I already let you in without noticing. Sloane's breath hitched slightly, but then she looked away, stepping back, arms crossing again. You don't know me, Avery. You don't know what you're letting in. Then tell me why, so you can feel sorry for me. Pity doesn't pay well, sweetheart. You think this is about pity? Avery's voice sharpened. I see you, Sloane. I see the way you never beg, never ask, never let anyone offer help without biting their hand. You think you're hiding your story, but you're bleeding it from your eyes. Sloane's jaw clenched. Careful. You don't want to know the things I've done to survive. Try me. A long beat passed. Then Sloane sat across from her. Not close, not far. Her eyes didn't blink. I wasn't always on the street. I had a life, a partner, a job. And then one day, someone decided I didn't deserve any of it. One lie, one accusation, and suddenly I was out of work, out of options, out of home. I stayed with a friend for a while, slept in shelters, got used to people pretending I didn't exist until I stopped trying to exist at all. Avery was quiet. She didn't move. And now, Sloane shrugged. Now I'm here in a dress that isn't mine with a woman I don't know pretending I'm someone I'm not. Are you pretending? Aren't we both? The words hit deep. Avery stood slow and stepped closer. I don't want you to pretend. That's dangerous. I'm done playing safe. Sloane stared at her, something flickering in her expression. Then take the next risk. Avery. Let go. Avery didn't answer. She reached for Sloane again, kissed her slower this time with intention. Not to distract, not to escape, but to feel, to anchor. To finally admit that what was happening wasn't just strategy or revenge or performance. It was real and terrifying and possibly the first honest thing either of them had tasted in years. When they pulled apart, Sloane whispered, "What happens when the night ends?" Avery replied, "I don't want it to." But just then the door burst open. Camilla stood there, arms crossed, lips tight. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Avery stepped forward. "You don't knock anymore. I thought maybe you'd want to stop embarrassing yourself in public rooms. Is that what this is?" Avery said coldly. "Embarrassment? Or are you just upset that I finally moved on?" Camilla didn't even look at her. Her eyes were on Sloane. "Do you even know who she is?" "I know enough." Avery snapped. "Do you?" Camilla walked in, throwing a folded piece of paper onto the table. "Then maybe you'd want to read this." Sloane went pale. Avery picked up the paper, brows furrowing as she scanned the page. Her face froze. Sloane's voice was quiet, broken. "Avery, I can explain. You told me you lost your job," Avery said slowly. "You didn't tell me it was because of this." Sloane looked down. "I didn't want you to see me differently. It's a police report, Camilla said, voice slick. Fraud embezzlement. She stole from her own company. I didn't steal, Sloane snapped. I was set up. Convenient, Camilla muttered. But Avery wasn't looking at either of them. Just at the paper, then at Sloane, then at the space between them that suddenly felt like a cliff. I need a moment, she said quietly, and walked out. The paper still clutched in her shaking hand. Avery's heels echoed down the long marble corridor, sharp against the silence, each step fueled by the heat rising under her skin. She didn't know what she was more furious about, the paper in her hand, or the fact that part of her still wanted to turn around and go back to Sloane. Her mind was spinning, chaos pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She found herself in a side hallway, empty except for the low hum of wall lights and the sound of distant music. She leaned against the wall, unfolding the paper again. The report was short, official. A charge of embezzlement tied to a company Avery had never heard of filed over a year ago. The dates lined up perfectly with the time Sloane claimed to have lost everything. But she hadn't mentioned this, not even hinted. Avery stared at Sloane's name inked in stark black and felt something split inside. Not because of the lie, but because of how fiercely she wanted it not to be one. You didn't come this far just to shatter again, she murmured to herself, folding the paper slowly. Precisely, as if careful hands could crease the chaos in her chest into order. It didn't. Footsteps drew near behind her. She didn't turn. If it's Camilla, I swear, it's not. Sloane's voice was low, tight. Not the usual razor of sarcasm Avery had learned to expect. Only quiet exhaustion. Avery turned, measured. Sloane hovered at the corridor's edge, arms wrapped around herself like she wasn't sure she was allowed to stand there. You left, Sloane said, barely above a whisper. You lied, Avery answered. I didn't lie, Sloane said, steady. I just didn't tell you everything. That's not better. No. But it isn't what you think. Avery's breath snagged. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to step forward. She did neither. Then tell me the truth. All of it, now. No edits. Sloane blew out a hard breath and came closer, but not too close. I worked for a real estate firm. Small, family-run. They trusted me with accounts, budgets, transactions. I stayed late, dragged them out of messes, fixed crap no one else would touch. Then I learned the owner's son was moving money through the company. I called him out. He threatened me, said if I didn't shut up, he'd make it look like I was the one stealing. And he did, Avery said, flat. Yeah. He planted records, emails, told HR I was unstable, volatile, said I'd been showing up late, slipping out with cash. They fired me. No severance, no lawyer. And when the police knocked, they already had his version of the story. Avery held her gaze. Why didn't you fight? I did, Sloane said, voice taut, until I ran out of options, out of money, out of friends. You think I wanted to end up on a bench, reading books strangers left like scraps? I wasn't living. I was vanishing. The quiet that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy with what neither of them said. Avery stepped closer. You should have told me. Would you have believed me? I don't know, Avery admitted. But it would have been your truth, not hers. Sloane looked down. I didn't tell you because I didn't want this to be over before it began. Avery's eyes narrowed. What is this, to you? It was meant to be one night, a distraction. Then you kissed me, and it didn't feel false. That soft confession struck deeper than she likely intended. Avery moved closer still. It wasn't false. That's the problem. Their eyes caught. For a heartbeat, the hurt didn't matter. The questions, the paper, the past, everything blurred in the small distance between them. Then Sloane stepped back. You should go back to your world. I don't fit there. You think I care about the world I'm in? Avery's voice fractured. You think this version of me heals, designer dress, polished and bitter is the truth of who I am. Don't you? No, it's who I became after she broke me. But with you, her voice wavered. With you, I don't feel like I'm performing. I can breathe again. Sloane swallowed hard, fists clenched. Then don't walk away. You're the one telling me to go because I'm scared. So am I, Avery said, stepping close enough that their foreheads almost touched. But I'm still here. Sloane's breath shivered out of her lungs. And then she whispered, please don't make me regret this. I won't, Avery promised. And when they kissed this time, it wasn't urgent or hungry. It was slow, a kind of forgiveness, a promise they hadn't earned, but still needed to make. When they pulled apart, Sloane's fingers lingered on Avery's wrist. We should go back before someone starts another rumor. Avery smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, let them talk. It's the only thing they're good at. But as they walked back into the ballroom, something had shifted. The crowd didn't look the same. The lights felt harsher, the music louder. It wasn't their world anymore. It was a battlefield, and Camilla was already watching them. Glass of champagne in hand, smiled tight with suspicion. Avery leaned towards Sloane. She's not done. Neither are we, Sloane replied. They spent the next hour dodging questions, side-lancing gossip, and pretending to blend in. But everyone was watching now, especially Camilla. And when dinner was served and the toasts began, Avery felt her stomach twist. Camilla stood, tapping her glass. I just want to say, she began, eyes glinting, how grateful I am that so many people came tonight. Friends, relatives, and even the stray, uninvited faces. The room tittered, courteous and strained. Avery set her jaw. Camilla's stare clicked straight onto her. It takes grit to move forward after heartbreak, especially in public. Especially when there are whispers, allegations, scandals. Avery's nails pressed crescents into her palm. Under the table, Sloane's fingers found hers, a single squeeze, measuring her. But the past doesn't define us, Camilla went on. We grow, we learn, we turn into sharper versions of ourselves. She lifted her glass to growth, and to those who hold up the mirror so we can see ourselves more clearly, no matter how brief their appearance may be. It was a dagger dressed in velvet. Sloane didn't flinch. Avery rose slowly, glass raised. To new beginnings, she said, voice steady and bright, and to learning that sometimes the garbage takes itself out. A hush snapped through the room. Camilla's smile fell. Avery lowered herself again, eyes fixed on hers. Sloane breathed. That was savage. She earned worse. Sloane leaned in, lips grazing Avery's ear. You're lethal when you're honest. Avery turned to her. So are you? And for the first time that evening, they both smiled like they were winning, even if the battle was far from finished. Avery couldn't recall the last moment she felt truly seen in a crowd of people, only pretending to notice. Yet with Sloane right beside her, fingertips meeting beneath the linens, eyes lit with fire and defiance, everything turned keen, alive. The world wasn't safe, but it was truthful. For the first time in years, and that was far more dangerous. The rest of the wedding smeared into static speeches, toasts, laughter that sounded like glass crushing underfoot. Guests kept cutting glances toward their table, toward them. The mysterious woman on Avery Lockhart's arm, and the Aries, suddenly not so untouchable anymore. Camilla, meanwhile, held herself together like a porcelain figurine, flawless, posed, and empty. But Avery saw the hairline fractures starting. She knew her ex knew the tells. The tightening jaw when Sloane laughed aloud. The twitch in her smile whenever Avery leaned a fraction too near. Avery had once loved that woman, bled for her, imagined futures built together. Now, watching her fight to appear unbothered, Avery felt only icy clarity. She's coming apart, Avery murmured against Sloane's neck, breath warm. And it's delicious. Sloane chuckled, leaning into her a little. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Maybe a little, Sloane admitted, angling her face just enough that their mouths nearly touched. But I didn't come here for revenge. Then why did you come? Avery asked, voice low. Sloane watched her for a long beat. the smile softening into something gentler. Because I wanted to know if you were real. Avery blinked, still weighing it. There wasn't space to answer. A server arrived with a note, no envelope. Only folded card with Avery's name scripted in perfect cursive. She opened it slowly. One line. Meet me in the bridal suite. Alone? Camilla. Avery's jaw locked. She felt Sloane reading over her shoulder. Don't, Sloane said at once. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Avery muttered. But I want to hear what she still thinks she can take from me or what she thinks you'll give. Their gazes welded, heat flickering between fatigue and something deeper. I'll be fine, Avery said. We both know what this is. Anyway, will you stay close? Don't let her bait you. She knows how to twist things. She taught me how to twist back. Sloane didn't argue. She just nodded once and watched Avery walk away, her gaze unreadable. The bridal suite was at the top floor of the old Manhattan building, dressed in soft golds and creams, all luxury and curated nostalgia. Avery stepped inside without knocking. Camilla stood near the window, a glass of white wine in her hand. Her wedding dress now trailing slightly as if the weight of the evening had finally started to pull it down. You look tired, Avery said, and yet you came. Don't flatter yourself. Camilla turned slowly. She's using you. You mean Sloane? Whatever her name is. You think someone like that cares about you? She's clinging to the first person who gave her power again. You sound threatened. I sound like someone who knows what manipulation looks like. Avery laughed bitter. You would. You don't belong with her. And who do I belong with? The woman who cheated on me with her co-founder because I was too emotionally intense. You are intense, Avery. Everything with you is fire or ice. No in between. That's because I feel I don't know myself with fake smiles and photo ops. Camilla's voice dropped. I didn't want to hurt you, but you did anyway. You are becoming someone I didn't recognize. No, Camilla, Avery said, stepping forward. I've became someone you couldn't control. That hit the nerve. Camilla's mask slipped just for a second. You think you're in love with her, don't you? I think I'm finally breathing again. Avery shot back. So, maybe don't question it. Camilla approached, her voice suddenly quieter. You came tonight because you wanted to prove something. I came tonight because I'm done hiding. Then be honest, Camilla said inches from her now. If she hadn't said yes, if that woman hadn't agreed to come, would you still have shown up? Avery didn't answer. That's what I thought, Camilla whispered. You didn't come for me. You came to show yourself that you were still worth wanting. Avery stepped back. I am worth wanting and so is she. She turned to leave. Camilla didn't stop her, but as Avery opened the door, she said, just remember, when the lights fade and she sees the real you, she'll walk away, too. Avery didn't flinch. She didn't reply. She just closed the door quietly behind her and walked straight down the hall, breathing hard, heart pounding, every part of her vibrating with rage, hurt and something that felt dangerously like clarity. Sloane was waiting by the stairwell. Well, she tried to get in my head, Avery said. Almost did, but she didn't. No, Avery paused. She said, when you see the real me, you'll leave, too. Sloane tilted her head. She doesn't know me. No, Avery said, stepping closer. But I want you to. Then stop holding back. Avery exhaled. I'm terrified. So am I, Sloane replied. But maybe fear is the only doorway where real begins. They didn't kiss. Not yet. The moment was too bare for that. Too electric, too fragile, too honest to risk breaking. But their hands found each other. And in the hush of that stairwell, they stood side by side, shoulders almost touching, breaths sensing in the dim light, like two women willing to believe they could rewrite the ending. Below, the reception was winding down. Guests were slipping out. The orchestra was packing cases. Avery walked Sloane to the car, the cold night air slicing through the remnants of heat between them. The driver held the door. Avery hesitated. Come with me, she said. Sloane studied her. To where? Wherever I go next. Sloane's voice was a whisper. And if I don't belong in your world, I'll torch mine and build one that fits us both. Sloane slid into the car without a word. Avery followed, and as the door sealed behind them, the city swallowed the rest of the wedding and whatever story Avery had come to bury. The limousine carved through the Manhattan dark like a secret too dangerous to say aloud. Inside, the silence between them wasn't empty. It throbbed. It shifted. It held everything they hadn't dared name or say since the reception ended. Avery sat across from Sloane now. Not beside her. Not yet. City light washed through the tinted glass, painting them in gold and shadow. Avery had slipped off her heels. Her lipstick was slightly blurred. Her control, what remained of it, frayed at the edges. Sloane hadn't spoken since they climbed in. She watched her the way she always did, not with judgment, but with a keenness like stripping paint from a wall Avery didn't realize she'd built around herself. At last, Sloane said, "You didn't kiss her." Avery blinked. "What? Camilla, you didn't let her touch you?" "No, I didn't." "Good." That single word cracked something open. Avery let her head rest against the seat, eyes closing for a beat. "I was afraid I might want to." Sloane stayed still. "Did you?" "No. Not even a little." Avery opened her eyes, catching Sloane's gaze across the soft light. "That scared me more." "Why?" "Because it means I'm truly done with her. That there's room for something else now. Something true." Sloane shifted, crossing one leg over the other. Her posture casual, her expression anything but. "So what now, Avery? Was I only the plot twist in your heartbreak? Is that what you think?" "I don't know. I've been used before. People like collecting tragedy. It makes them feel generous." Avery flinched. "You're not a project. You're not some sob story I dressed up to parade around. Then what am I?" Avery leaned forward, slow and deliberate, her voice like velvet wrapped around steel. "You're the only person who's looked straight into me and seen past the armor. You're the only one who made me feel I didn't have to perform to be wanted." Sloane's lips parted slightly, but no sound came. "You want real," Avery whispered. "I don't sleep through the night. I grind my teeth until my jaw locks. I rehearse what I'm going to say before I say it, even in casual conversations, because I'm terrified of sounding like I don't belong. I haven't let anyone touch me and mean it in almost a year, until you." The quiet that followed was tectonic. Sloane's voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "Say that again." "I haven't let anyone touch me." Avery repeated, her throat thick. "Until you." Sloane moved then, slow, purposeful. She sat beside her on the leather seat, knees brushing, fingers ghosting over Avery's hand. "Then let me do it again," she said, and it wasn't a question. Avery's eyes fluttered shut as Sloane's fingers slid up her arm, pausing at her shoulder. Her touch wasn't desperate. It was reverent, like she was unwrapping something precious and breakable. Avery turned face inches from skies. "You're not scared anymore." "I am," Sloane whispered, "but I'm more scared of not doing this." And then they kissed. Not for show, not for power, not even for comfort. It was deep, deliberate, like breathing each other, and was the only way to survive the rest of the night. Avery's hands found Sloane's jaw, pulling her closer. Sloane responded with a slow hunger, fingertips tracing down Avery's spine, grounding her, undoing her. Avery had always been in control, of people, of perception of herself. But Sloane was undoing that control with nothing more than tenderness and tension. With every glance that said, "I see you." They didn't speak for a while. The city rolled by, their breaths synchronized. Avery's head rested lightly on Sloane's shoulder, her fingers tangled in hers. "Where are we going?" Sloane asked eventually, her voice soft against the humming silence. "My place," Avery said, "unless you'd rather." "No, I want to see where you live." "Why?" "Because I want to know who you are when no one's watching." The honesty of it made Avery's chest ache. 30 minutes later, The car pulled into the underground garage of a high-rise in Topeka. The kind of building with private elevators and a doorman who didn't ask questions. Avery led Sloane through sleek corridors, her bare feet silent on marble. The penthouse opened with a soft click. Floor-to-ceiling windows greeted them, showcasing a glittering skyline that felt almost too distant to be real. Sloane stepped inside slowly like the space might reject her, but it didn't. It was quiet, expensive, minimalist, and yet somehow cold. Avery dropped her purse on the counter and turned to see Sloane running her fingers lightly over a glass sculpture on the shelf. "This place is beautiful," Sloane said, "but it doesn't feel lived in." "That's because it's not," Avery admitted. "I work, I sleep, I exist, but I haven't really lived in a long time." "You live now." Avery crossed the room slowly. "I want you to stay tonight." Sloane didn't hesitate. "Okay." Avery moved to the bedroom, her voice lower now. "Come with me." Inside, the room was even colder than the rest. Stark gray bedding, no personal touches, no framed photos. Sloane stood at the doorway. "You sleep here most nights?" Avery said. "Some nights the couch." "No wonder you're tired." Avery laughed softly. "Stay, Sloane. Just for tonight. No expectations. Just stay." Sloane walked in, unzipping the gown slowly. Avery turned away to give her space, but didn't leave. She let the silence say what her body couldn't. When she turned back, Sloane was in one of Avery's oversized button-down shirts, barefoot, hair loose. She looked like a secret Avery wanted to keep forever. "You're staring," Sloane said, almost teasing. "I'm memorizing." They lay in bed, not touching at first, just side by side. The distance between their bodies held 1,000 unsaid things. Avery whispered, "Tell me something no one knows about you." "I sleep with one foot out of the blanket. Can't stand being completely covered." Avery smiled. "Tell me another." "I used to sing in school. Choir competitions. I was going to study music, but then life happened." "I'd like to hear you sing someday." "You'd regret it," Sloane said, but her voice warmed. "Your turn." "I had an imaginary friend until I was 13.13. I was lonely." Sloane reached out then, just her fingers brushing lightly against Avery's arm. "You're not anymore." "Not tonight," Avery whispered. "Maybe not ever again." Sloane leaned in slowly, pressing her lips gently against Avery's forehead. And for the first time in over a year, Avery Lockhart fell asleep with someone else's arms around her, and didn't feel like she was falling apart. Morning arrived without warning. It wasn't gentle. The city never was. Light slipped through the tall glass of Avery's penthouse, gold and precise, creeping over the bed's edge until it kissed the curve of Sloane's bare shoulder. Avery woke slowly, like rising from a dream. She didn't want to move. For a breath, she forgot where she was. Then she felt the warmth beside her, the steady rhythm of another body breathing next to her, the faint trace of lavender, and something deeper, more human. The real Sloane. Avery didn't shift, afraid to break the spell that had carried them through the night and left them twined beneath gray sheets and quiet understanding. Sloane lay on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, hair loose over the pillow. Her face was calm in a way Avery had never seen. Not guarded, not edged, just peaceful, like the storm had finally gone still. Avery's chest drew tight. She reached, brushed a strand from Sloane's face, and let her fingers linger. Sloane stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a beat she said nothing. Then, without warning, she smiled. "You're staring again. I told you I'd memorize you. I didn't think you meant it literally. I mean everything I say to you." That made Sloane's gaze narrow, softening into something more serious. "Careful, Avery. Keep saying things like that and I might believe you." "Good. I want you to." Sloane eased up, tugging the blanket with her. "What time is it?" "Early," Avery said. "Too early for anything real." "Then let's not be real yet." They stayed in bed another hour trading fragments, laughter, Silent small truths people don't offer on a first morning. Avery learned Sloane loved thunderstorms and hated fireworks. That she was left-handed. That a scar along her left rib came from a bike crash she never told anyone about. And Sloane, in turn, learned about the little piano in the corner. Quiet for years because Avery couldn't bring herself to play after her father died. "You're not who I thought you were," Sloane said at last, tracing invisible lines on Avery's thigh. "Neither are you. And who am I in your version?" Avery didn't pause. "Someone who makes me want to stop pretending." The silence stretched, not awkward, but full, weighted with possibility. Then the spell broke. Avery's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, twice, then without stopping. She grabbed it, exhaled. "It's my assistant. Probably panicking because I vanished from the party without a heads up." "You did disappear from a public event with a mysterious woman," Sloane teased. "Would have made headlines even without the kiss." Avery laughed, but the lightness faded. She scanned a text, and her smile fell. "What is it?" Sloane asked. Avery waited. "My board wants an emergency session. Apparently, there's a leak. Photos from the wedding of us. Of me with you with some creative commentary attached." Sloane's shoulder stiffened. "Creative how?" Avery turned the screen toward her. A headline flashed on a gossip site. "Heiress Avery Lockhart rebounds with former convict at ex's wedding. Revenge or breakdown?" Sloane's face went blank. Avery could see the walls slamming back into place behind her eyes. "Former convict," Sloane muttered. "They make it sound so permanent." "They're vultures," Avery said. "You knew this might happen." "No, you knew." "I didn't." Sloane stood, grabbing her clothes from the floor. "Sloane, it's fine," she cut in. "I get it. This was always temporary." "Don't do that," Avery said, standing too. "Don't put words in my mouth just because you're scared." "I'm not scared," Sloane snapped, buttoning her shirt. "I'm realistic. You're a millionaire. I'm a scandal. We don't belong in the same sentence. I don't care what people say. You will when your board threatens your position. When investors pull out when your name becomes mine. Then let them pull out," Avery said, stepping in front of her. "Let them talk. Let them burn. I'm not giving up something real because of what people think they know." Sloane's breathing was uneven. Her fingers shook and she clenched them into fists. "You don't understand what it's like to be dragged through headlines you didn't write." "Don't I?" Avery whispered. "You think I haven't been ripped apart by the press before? Think I haven't been reduced to a headline? Emotional heiress has public meltdown after breakup. Lockhart legacy in jeopardy after scandal. They've written my story without asking me for years. Then why would you want more of it?" "Because this time I get to write it with someone who actually sees me." Sloane looked at her for a long moment. Neither of them moved. Then Sloane's voice broke the silence. Small and hoarse arrow. "I don't know how to do this, Avery. I've been surviving for so long. I don't know how to be with someone." "Then let's learn together." Sloane looked down. "I should go. Stay. You don't need me here." "I do." Avery stepped forward again. This time slower, softer. "Not because I'm broken. Not because I need saving. But because when you're near me, I'm honest. I breathe better. I stop being who they told me to be and start being who I actually am." Sloane's voice cracked. "You're going to regret this. Only if you walk out that door." The pause stretched. Sloane stared at the handle, at her shoes, at the distance she'd just placed between them. Then finally, she let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "I hate that you know how to say all the right things. I'm not saying them to win. I'm saying them because they're true." Sloane looked up, and this time her eyes were glassy. No sarcasm. No armor. "You scare the hell out of me." Avery reached for her hand. "Good. That means this is real." And slowly, Sloane let her hand be held. The headlines still existed. The calls would keep coming. The world outside Avery's penthouse was still sharp and cruel. But for now, they were here. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next 48 hours unfolded like the quiet before a storm that no one could stop. Avery didn't leave the penthouse. She barely touched her phone except to silence it. Every news outlet had caught wind of the photos. The tabloids spun their lies fast, calling Sloane everything from a calculated gold digger to a former felon, seducing her way into high society. Sloane barely reacted. She'd seen worse. She'd lived through worse. But what shook her wasn't the words. It was the fear behind Avery's eyes every time she read a headline. Not fear of Sloane. Fear of losing her. It started with subtle shifts. Avery canceled meetings, turned off press calls, kept the curtains drawn. Sloane could feel the walls building again, not between them, but around Avery's carefully controlled world. And the strangest part, Sloane wasn't angry. She was terrified, too, because part of her still believed this couldn't last, that nothing good ever did. But then came the breaking point. The board meeting. Avery stood in the glass-walled conference room of her company's Manhattan headquarters. Hair pulled back, suit sharp as a scalpel. Sloane waited outside the room like a shadow, refusing to sit. She didn't belong here, not in marble lobbies and filtered lighting and polite fake smiles. But she stayed for Avery. Inside, the board didn't waste time. "You've been making reckless decisions," the chairman said, walking out of public events, refusing to comment on media coverage, ignoring our crisis team. "What's the actual concern here?" Avery asked _ that I'm dating someone the press doesn't like or that I'm doing it openly. A woman 3 seats downside. "It's not about your personal life. It's about the optics. Investors are asking questions. Then tell them I'm still the same person who built this company from scratch. The same person who's doubled our valuation in under 3 years. But you're also the person headlining gossip blogs," the chairman said. "And that's not sustainable." Avery smiled coldly. "You know what else isn't sustainable? Letting fear of perception dictate who I'm allowed to love. Silence. Thick and brutal. We're not telling you to end it," one board member said, voice quieter. "But we are telling you to be careful publicly, strategically." "So what? I date her in the shadows. Let the world believe I'm ashamed of the only honest thing in my life." "We're asking you to think about your legacy." "I am thinking about it," Avery said, "and I'm not interested in building one that requires me to pretend to be someone I'm not." The meeting ended with nothing resolved. Sloane was still waiting in the hallway when Avery stepped out, her face unreadable. "Well," Sloane asked. "They're scared," Avery said, "and they want me to be, too." "And are you?" "Yes." Sloane nodded. "So what now?" Avery didn't answer. Not immediately. She took Sloane's hand in the middle of the hallway. Flashes of suits and passing glances be damned, and said, "Now we stop letting them decide what happens next." That night, Avery made a choice. She opened the curtains. She sat at her desk and wrote a statement. Not a press release, not PR, just the truth. It began, "Her name is Sloane, and she's not who you say she is." Avery read it aloud to Sloane before posting. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. Sloane just listened, silent. When Avery finished, Sloane whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Avery looked at her. "Because for once, I'm not protecting an image. I'm protecting you." Sloane swallowed hard. "You don't have to do this for me." "I'm not. I'm doing it for us." She posted it. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Headlines shifted. Avery Lockhart breaks silence. Defends relationship in emotional statement. The comments were vicious. Others were supportive. Divided, loud. But Avery never looked away. And Sloane never left her side. That night, they lay in bed again. This time with the world watching outside. "You didn't have to fight for me," Sloane murmured into the silence. "I've never had anyone do that before." "Then maybe it's time you get used to it." Sloane looked over. "What if I mess this up? Then we'll mess it up together. You're too good at saying the right thing." "It's not about saying it. It's about meaning it." The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Unannounced, uninvited. Avery opened it and froze. Camilla stood there, not smug, not cruel, just shaken. "Can we talk?" she asked alone. Avery didn't move. "Say what you need to say here." Camilla hesitated. Her voice was quieter than Avery had ever heard it. "You love her." "Yes." "And she loves you?" "Yes." "Then I'm sorry." Avery blinked. "What? I thought I was the one who broke you. But maybe I just revealed who you were meant to become." Sloane appeared behind Avery in one of her button-downs, barefoot, arms crossed. "Should I give you to space?" Avery smiled. No, she was just leaving. Camilla looked at Sloane. "Take care of her." "I plan to," Sloane said, and Camilla walked away without another word. Avery closed the door and leaned against it, stunned. "That was weird." "Very," Sloane agreed. Avery turned. "You okay? Are you not even a little shaken by her?" "Then come here," and Avery fell into her, held on like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind skyscrapers and the city turned golden again, Sloane sat at the piano quietly. Tentatively, Avery stood across the room barefoot and still damp from a shower. "I didn't know you could play." "I can't." "Not really. You're still touching it like it matters." "Maybe it does." Sloane pressed one key, then another, tentative, imperfect, but true. Avery watched, and all the noise headlines, boardrooms, whispers fell away. There was only this, a battered piano and a woman with work-toughened fingers, trying to make something beautiful. "Play with me," Sloane said. "I haven't in years." "Then start now." Avery sat beside her. Their hands met over the keys. They played nothing familiar, just a language of sound and hush, of presence, of effort. And in that moment, Avery understood she didn't need the world's permission. She needed this room, these hands, this woman, this life they were building note by note, even if out of tune, especially because of it. The next week felt like borrowed time. Avery's penthouse turned into a refuge where the outside couldn't fully reach. The press didn't quit. They never do. Photos, captions, and endless guesses about Sloane's past and Avery's future circled through the feeds like vultures, waiting for a body that refused to die. But inside those walls, something rare took root. Not flashy, not fast, quietly, like a steady bloom with roots deep enough to hold against the clamor. Sloane stopped sleeping on edge. Avery started laughing more. They boiled pasta at midnight, splashed wine on the rug, and slow danced to old records in the dark. Sloane cued a playlist and dared Avery to let go. She did. For the first time, joy didn't feel staged. It felt lived, but nothing that real stays untouched for long. It began with a phone call. Avery lounged on the sofa, legs draped across Sloane's lap, skimming her inbox while Sloane read. Her assistant's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, Elise," Avery answered. "Tell me I'm not trending again." "You're not. Not yet. But you should brace yourself." Avery sat up. "What happened?" "Sloane's case. The old one, embezzlement, fraud. Someone filed to reopen the records." Avery felt the heat drain from her blood. "Who? We don't know yet. It's anonymous for now. But the motion is moving fast. They want to investigate again. New evidence, they're claiming." Avery glanced at Sloane, who looked up at her with that sharp, intuitive gaze. She knew something was wrong. "Kimmy updated," Avery said quickly, ending the call. She didn't want to say the words, but Sloane saw it anyway. "What's happening?" Avery hesitated. "The case is being reopened. Someone's pushing it forward. Anonymous for now." Sloane didn't flinch. She just leaned back slowly, lips pressing into a thin line. "So, it's not over. We'll fight it. You shouldn't have to. You think I'm going to let them drag your name through the dirt again? They already are," Sloane said quietly. "This is your world, Avery. The legal system, the media, the optics. I don't belong in it." "Then we'll change it," Avery snapped. "Well, break it open and rebuild it if we have to." You can't fix everything with money and fury. Maybe not, Avery said, voice softening. But I can make damn sure you don't go through this alone. That night, Sloane didn't sleep. Avery could feel it in the way her breath stayed uneven, the way her body remained still beside her under the sheets. Avery reached out in the dark. Talk to me. I'm scared. Me, too. Not just about the case. About you. About this. Avery turned toward her. Why? Because no one's ever stayed. Not really. And now I don't know what to do with someone who's still here. You hold on, Avery whispered. You fight for it just like I'm fighting for you. Sloane was quiet for a long time. Then what if I lose again? Avery pressed their foreheads together. Then we lose together. The next day, everything escalated. Avery's lawyers got involved. So did the press. It didn't take long for someone to leak a document. Old evidence. Sloane's name plastered again across headlines. Accused ex-employee tied to new scandal. Is Avery Lockhart's judgment in question? Her board called again, urging discretion, asking for distance. Avery refused. You're letting your personal life interfere with the company's reputation, they warned. And you're letting prejudice dictate policy, she snapped. We'll weather this. But behind her strength, she was unraveling. Sloane saw it. Avery came home that night with her hands shaking. She tried to hide it, but Sloane was already on her feet, waiting. You're not okay. I'm managing. Don't lie to me. Avery exhaled. They're trying to force me to step down. If I don't distance myself from you, I'll lose the company. Sloane didn't speak at first. Then she asked, Is it worth it? You are? No, Sloane said, stepping closer. I'm asking you, is the company worth losing for this? Avery met her eyes. Nothing is worth losing you. Sloane's voice dropped. I don't want to be the reason your world collapses. Then build a new one with me. Sloane took her hand. If you do this, if you walk away from everything you built, what happens if I can't be enough? You already are. That night, Sloane did something she hadn't done since the beginning. She left. Not forever, just for air, just to think. Avery didn't try to stop her. She just stood at the window, watching the city stretch out below her, and wondered what the hell it meant to love someone, enough to lose everything for them. Sloane walked the city streets in borrowed boots and a jacket too thin for the cold. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to breathe in a world that hadn't been curated, polished, or wrapped in wealth. She ended up on a bench, the same one where Avery first found her, where everything had begun. She stared at the cracks in the pavement, at the remnants of a city that had chewed her up and spit her out, and wondered if she'd made a mistake letting someone like Avery, Indiana. But then a soft voice broke through the noise. I thought I might find you here, Avery. No makeup, no coat, just her human. Sloane looked up. How do you know? Because when I'm lost, I go back to the last place I felt like myself. Avery sat beside her. I can't make the world kinder. I can't erase what they've said, but I can promise you one thing. I'll fight every goddamn person who tries to erase you again, even if it costs you everything. Especially then. Sloane's voice trembled. You're terrifying. You know that. So are you, Avery said, reaching for her hand. That's why we work. I didn't mean to fall for you, Sloane whispered. I just wanted a hot shower and to piss off your ex. Avery smiled. And look where that got us. Somewhere dangerous. Somewhere real. They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. They just sat there on the bench, hands entwined, the city roaring around them like it always had. And for once, Sloane didn't feel like she had to survive it alone. They didn't go back to the penthouse that night. Avery booked a room in a quiet boutique hotel near the West Village. No marble, no staff that called her Miss Lockhart, no towering skyline pressing down on them. Just a bed with warm sheets, the muted hum of city life outside the window, and the unspoken agreement that for one night they would exist outside of everything, the past, the future, the noise. Inside that room, they didn't speak for a long time. They lay facing each other, hands resting in the space between them, breathing in sync. There were no declarations, no promises, just silence and something sacred inside it. But Avery's mind wouldn't stop. She kept seeing the email, the threat. Anonymous source demands full criminal investigation. She saw the board's tight smiles, the headlines she hadn't clicked on, the investors whispering in rooms she wasn't invited to anymore. And beneath it all, she saw Sloane standing alone on that bench again. Brave, defiant, breakable. "You're spiraling," Sloane said softly, eyes locked on hers. Avery blinked. "I'm trying not to." "Don't try. Just tell me." Avery exhaled. "I'm scared I'm going to lose everything because of me." "No," Avery said instantly. "Because of them. Because they've decided who I'm allowed to be and who I'm allowed to love. And I let them control that for too long." Sloane sat up slightly. "Avery, I'm not ashamed of you. Do you understand that?" "Not 1 second. But I've spent my whole life building something, and now they're threatening to take it unless I play by their rules again." "Then don't play." "If I don't, I lose the company. The board has the leverage to push me out. My name doesn't protect me like it used to. And if you do play, then I stay quiet. I let them bury the investigation again. I let them act like you're a stain on my life instead of the best goddamn part of it." Sloane's throat tightened. "Avery, I don't want to be the reason you lose your legacy. You're not. You're the reason I know what it's worth." Avery sat up too, folding her legs under herself. "I thought success would save me. That if I worked hard enough, earned enough, built enough, I'd never have to feel powerless again. But the truth is, none of that means anything if I can't choose who I am. And right now, I choose us." Sloane reached for her hand slowly. "What if we fight and still lose? Then we'll lose knowing we were honest." "That sounds terrifying." "It is." Sloane stared at her. "Then let's do it." Avery's breath caught. "What? Let's fight." "Not quietly. Not politely. Let's go to war if we have to." Avery laughed a little broken, a little breathless. "Are you sure you want to burn with me?" Sloane smiled, eyes blazing. "I want to build something from the ashes." The next morning, they met with Avery's legal team. Sloane stood beside her the entire time, head held high, jaw set like stone. The lawyers laid it out. The anonymous party pushing the case forward was connected to the company Sloane once worked for. The man who framed her, Dorian Pike, was now a junior partner using new influence to pressure prosecutors into reopening the case. "He's trying to bury me for good," Sloane said, voice even. "No," Avery corrected. "He's trying to keep you invisible." They decided to fight back. Not with silence, with visibility. Avery called in favors, reached out to investigative journalists she trusted, and together they started pulling threads. Sloane provided every detail, every name, every timeline. It was brutal, dragging her past back into the light, letting herself be seen not as a victim, but as someone still bleeding. But she wasn't alone this time. She had Avery, and Avery had her. Days passed like fire. Articles began to surface, not about Sloane's arrest, but about the corruption behind it. The missing audits, the deleted files. A whistleblower came forward quietly, carefully, but enough to plant a crack in Dorian Pike's carefully guarded story. One night, after another long day of interviews and meetings, Sloane and Avery collapsed on the penthouse couch. Sloane laid her head on Avery's chest, listening to her heartbeat. "Do you think it's working? It's louder than silence ever was. Do you ever wish we could just disappear? Go somewhere no one knows our names sometimes? Where would we go?" Avery smiled. "Italy. A vineyard. You'd make wine. I'd pretend I know how to prune grapevines. You look hot doing it. You drink all the profits." Sloane laughed softly, then quieter. "Do you think we'll make it?" Avery wrapped her arms around her. "We already are." That night, Sloane had a nightmare. Avery woke to find her trembling, breath shallow, eyes wide. "It's okay," Avery whispered, pulling her close. "You're safe." "He was there," Sloane muttered. "In the dream, Dorian," he said. "I was nothing again." Avery kissed her temple. "You're not nothing. You never were. He took everything from me, and now you're taking it back." Sloane clung to her like a lifeline. "Don't let me fall." "Never." The next day, they received an unexpected call. The district attorney's office had reviewed the new evidence. A formal investigation into Dorian Pike had begun. The charges against Sloane were under review for dismissal, this time publicly. Sloane hung up and just stood there silent. Avery stepped behind her, hands on her shoulders. "It's not over," Sloane whispered. "No," Avery said, "but it's beginning again. This time on your terms." Sloane turned slowly, her eyes full of something neither of them had words for yet. "You gave me my voice back. You gave me a reason to listen." They didn't kiss. Not yet. The moment was too full, too sacred. Instead, they stood forehead to forehead in the middle of the kitchen, wrapped in quiet triumph, knowing that the world hadn't ended, and neither had they. In fact, something bigger had just begun. The storm didn't end just because the truth began to surface. In some ways, it only grew louder. Dorian Pike's lawyers came out swinging. Statements denying everything. Accusations of retaliation. Threats of lawsuits against Avery, against the journalists, even against the DA's office. But Avery didn't blink. Neither did Sloane, because for the first time the noise outside didn't shake the foundation between them. It only revealed how solid it had become. Still, the price of truth was steep. One morning, Avery arrived at her office to find her name removed from the company directory. The board had voted quietly, strategically. She hadn't been fired, but she'd been frozen. Her role under review, her access temporarily suspended, her leadership in transition. She stared at the locked door of her own corner office, jaw tight, and didn't say a word. She simply turned and walked out, past employees who didn't meet her eyes. Past the receptionist who used to greet her with coffee, past a decade of blood, sweat, and late nights sacrificed to build something she no longer recognized. When she got into the elevator, she didn't cry. She just pulled out her phone and called Sloane. "Come home," Avery said. "I already am," Sloane replied, and she was waiting at the penthouse barefoot, cooking something that smelled like comfort. Avery walked in and fell into her arms without speaking. Sloane didn't ask. She just held her long tight, solid. "They took it from me," Avery whispered. "Then we'll build something else," Sloane answered. "Together." That night, they sat on the floor with takeout containers and a bottle of wine that cost more than Sloane had ever seen in one place before. But neither of them cared. They weren't celebrating money. They were celebrating survival. "Do you miss it?" Sloane asked. "The power." Avery shook her head. "No, I miss being heard. You still are louder than ever. I miss thinking I had control." "You have me," Sloane said, "and I choose you. That's a kind of control no one can take." Avery stared at her quiet. "I don't deserve you. That's not how love works. I thought love was choosing someone despite everything. It's choosing someone because of everything." Avery exhaled slowly, and in that breath something released. The weight of titles, of legacy, of pretending she didn't need anyone. She leaned in and kissed Sloane. Slow, full, not desperate, not afraid, just present. Like she knew that everything else in her life might fall apart. But this woman in her arms was the one thing worth holding on to. The next few days moved fast. Dorian's house was raided, computers seized, financial records uncovered. One whistleblower became 3. Journalists stopped asking about Sloane's past and started asking why the justice system had failed her in the first place. And then came the turning point, a subpoena. Dorian Pike was officially under investigation for fraud, coercion, and falsifying documents. The same charges Sloane had once carried on her back like a noose. She stood in front of the courthouse the day it was announced. reporters flashing cameras at her face, questions flying like darts. "Do you have anything to say to Mr. Pike?" one asked. Sloane didn't blink. "I hope he remembers what it feels like to be erased." Avery stepped beside her, took her hand in front of everyone. The cameras didn't matter. The stares didn't matter. Only that touch. Only that truth. That night, Sloane stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in Avery's penthouse, watching the city blink like it was holding its breath. Avery walked up behind her, wrapping her arms around her waist. "We did it," she whispered. "Not yet," Sloane said, "but we're close. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us." Sloane turned. "But I've been thinking." Avery braced herself. "About what?" "About what comes next. For real. Okay. I don't want to hide anymore, but I also don't want to live in someone else's space. Someone else's world, even if it's beautiful." "You want to leave?" "I want us to start our own place, our own space, nothing borrowed, nothing haunted by past versions of us." Avery blinked. "You mean move in together?" "I mean, build a life that doesn't begin with a wedding crash and end with court documents." Avery laughed softly, something blooming in her chest. "You want to move out with me or into something that's ours?" "Both." "Are you sure? Are you?" Avery took her face in both hands. "Sloane, I would follow you into fire. But if you're telling me we can start something fresh, something clean, I want that with you. Only you." Sloane smiled. "Then let's find a place. Nothing too perfect, just real." "You deserve perfect." "No, I deserve peace and love and mornings where we don't read headlines before breakfast." "Deal," Avery said, "but I still get to bring my espresso machine. Only if I get to name the Wi-Fi something ridiculous." "Like what?" Sloane grinned. "Lesbians of luxury." Avery burst out laughing. "You're insufferable. You're in love with me. Terrifyingly so." "Good." They kissed again. And this time, it wasn't a kiss of survival. It was a kiss of arrival, of something finally beginning after everything tried to end it. Avery pulled away just enough to whisper, "You realize what this means, right?" "What?" "The next chapter starts with us picking a couch. Let's make sure it's ugly," Sloane said, "so no one ever forgets we chose it together. Deal?" That night, they curled up in bed for the last time in the penthouse, their past behind them, their own place waiting. The war wasn't entirely over, but love had already won its most important battle, and from here on out, everything would be built on that victory. The new apartment wasn't impressive by Manhattan standards. 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, no concierge, no marble floors. The windows creaked when you opened them, and the kitchen cabinets were older than either of them would admit. But it had something Avery's penthouse never had: warmth, and it was theirs. Sloane signed the lease herself. Avery offered to buy the entire building. Sloane laughed and said, "No, I want to sign something that doesn't belong to your world," she said. "I want to own something that doesn't come with a headline." Avery understood and respected it. They moved in on a rainy Thursday, boxes stacked crookedly, furniture arriving piece by piece. Nothing matching, and nothing curated. Avery stood in the middle of the chaos, wearing ripped jeans, hair in a messy bun, no makeup, and looked happier than she ever had in the middle of million-dollar meetings. "We're going to need a bigger couch," she muttered. "We're going to need therapy if you buy another chair in beige." Sloane shot back. "I like beige. Beige is how empires fall." They laughed until they fell onto the floor, breathless and tangled in bubble wrap and each other. It felt like a beginning, but the past, no matter how far it felt, wasn't done with them. The trial date against Dorian Pike was set. The DA's office was pressing charges based on forged documents, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Sloane was listed as a key witness, and someone didn't want her to speak. The threat started quietly. First anonymous texts, then a shadow outside the apartment building. A man watching from a car parked across the street 2 nights in a row. Avery hired security. Sloane wanted to fight. "I'm not hiding again," she said. I've done enough hiding for one lifetime. You're not hiding, Avery said. You are surviving. Survival isn't supposed to look like fear. No, Avery whispered. It's supposed to look like this. You alive with me. But the real blow came days later. Avery received a letter from her legal team. Dorian's lawyers were countersuing, claiming Avery's public statements had defamed him, tanked his reputation, and caused irreparable professional damage. It was a classic tactic. Smear, distract, flip the narrative. He's desperate. Sloane said he's losing. That's what this is. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Avery said. Are you ready for that? I've been ready since the day you picked me off that bench. That wasn't charity. I know it was fate. Avery reached for her hand. Then let's finish what we started. The trial began on a cold Monday morning. Cameras flashed. Reporters screamed questions. Sloane walked through the courthouse doors in a navy suit Avery had tailored for her, had held high. Step steady, hands clenched to hide the tremble. Avery sat in the front row every day, watching, protecting, loving. The courtroom was cold and clinical. Dorian looked smug in his suit, flanked by lawyers with expensive pens and rehearsed objections. But Sloane looked like the truth. Clean, clear, solid. She told her story on the stand. Not just the version in the documents, but the real one. The fear, the gaslighting, the loneliness of being erased by people in power. The shame of trying to prove innocence in a world designed to believe the man in the better suit. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. And when Avery looked at her, she saw something she'd never seen in anyone before. Courage that wasn't for show. The defense tried to tear her apart, twisted her words, dug up her past, brought up the fact that she'd been homeless. Isn't it true? The lawyer said that you lived on the streets for months without steady income, unstable, unsupervised. Yes, Sloane said simply. I was surviving and I do it again because I survived your client. That shut the room up. Avery smiled. The trial dragged for a week. Dorian's arrogance started to crack. The jury wasn't buying his act. Too many holes, too many contradictions, too much evidence. And then on the 6th day, he broke. Caught in a lie, a forged signature, a shredded file recovered by one of the whistleblowers. Game over. The courtroom exploded. The judge called for order. Dorian's team asked for a recess. They didn't get it. When the verdict came, Sloane held her breath. Guilty. The word echoed like thunder. Dorian Pike was convicted on all counts. Sloane didn't cry. Not in front of them. She simply turned, walked down the aisle, and into Avery's arms. It's over, Sloane whispered. Not yet, Avery said. There's still something left to do. The next morning, Avery called a press conference. No lawyers, no PR team, just her and Sloane standing beside her, not behind her. She stepped to the mic. I built a company from the ground up. I broke records, made money, made mistakes. But the most important decision I ever made wasn't about business. It was about love. Cameras flashed, murmurs spread. Sloane was framed, and I helped tell the truth. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I finally understood that silence helps no one. She reached for Sloane's hand. I won't return to the company. I don't want to. The system I built doesn't reflect the person I've become. So, I'm starting something new with Sloane with values that don't fold under pressure. Sloane stepped forward. I used to believe that surviving was enough, that staying invisible was the safest path. But love doesn't live in shadows, and neither does justice. Avery turned to her. You ready, always. And together, in front of the world, they walked off that stage. Not broken, not hidden, not ashamed, but powerful. Together, behind the curtain. Avery stopped her. You didn't have to speak. I wanted to. You were perfect. No, Sloane whispered. I was honest. Avery kissed her slow and public, no longer caring who saw. The world didn't own them anymore. They owned themselves. 6 months later, no one cared that Avery Lockhart used to be the CEO of one of Manhattan's most powerful tech companies. They cared that she'd launched a new foundation, the Lark Initiative, designed to support wrongfully accused women and survivors of systemic injustice. They cared that she showed up to meetings in denim jackets and scuffed boots, no longer hiding behind heels and designer armor. They cared that the woman always beside her, Sloan Marlowe, spoke truth with a voice sharp as glass and soft as survival. Their story had gone from scandal to revolution. What started as a headline became a movement, but for them, the most important thing was never public. It was the life they were building day by day in a third-floor apartment, with plants that didn't die, laundry always halfway folded, and a cat Sloan rescued from a parking lot and named Monopoly. Because he's entitled, unpredictable, and refuses to share, she'd said. Avery had laughed until she cried. They'd learned how to exist outside the war zone, how to argue and still hold hands, how to disagree without disconnecting. Avery learned that Sloan liked her coffee black, her mornings quiet, and her kisses unhurried. Sloan learned that Avery needed reassurance sometimes without asking, that she hated thunder but loved storms, and that when she said, "I'm fine," it meant she needed a hug and at least 3 sarcastic comments before she'd smile again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for 2 women who had lived through silence, betrayal, and the weight of other people's expectations, it was heaven. One Sunday morning, Avery stood in the kitchen wearing Sloan's hoodie and nothing else, flipping pancakes like she hadn't once been on the cover of Forbes. Sloan walked in, sleepy-eyed, hair wild, wearing the robe Avery once declared hideous and now secretly loved. "You're cooking," Sloan said, blinking. "Do I need to call someone?" "It's edible," Avery said, handing her a plate. Mostly Sloan kissed her on the cheek. "If I die, I die happy." They sat on the floor to eat as always, surrounded by notebooks, protest flyers, and the echo of something soft that never really left the space anymore. Peace. Avery glanced at her across the plate. "So, I've been thinking." Sloan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, no, shut up. This is serious. You said that last time and then tried to convince me to buy matching bicycles. We still should." Avery reached behind her and pulled out a small box. Sloan froze. "Wait, what?" "Don't freak out. You're holding a box. It's not what you think." "Not yet." She opened it slowly. Inside was a single silver key on a worn leather chain. Sloan stared. "You already gave me a key?" "That was to the apartment. This is the studio downstairs. The one you always walk by and say you turn into a writing space or a community hub, or whatever you dream about when you think I'm not watching." Sloan didn't speak. "It's yours," Avery said softly. "I bought it, but only under the condition that it becomes what you want it to be. No branding, no press, just yours." Sloan's eyes filled slow and silent. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say, especially the things you don't say out loud." Sloan looked down at the key. "This is too much." "No," Avery said gently, reaching for her hand. "This is exactly enough. For everything you gave me that no one else could. For showing me what it means to live without pretending. For loving me when I didn't even know how to love myself yet. I still don't know what I'm doing half the time." "Same. That's why we're perfect." Sloan set the key down, crawled into Avery's lap, and kissed her like it was the first time or the last, or something in between that mattered more than either. When they pulled apart, Sloan whispered, "You're mine." "You know that dangerously so." "Good." They sat like that for a while, breathing, loving, surviving. And then somewhere between the silence and the sirens outside, Sloan smiled. "Okay, but if you ever propose to me, it better not be over pancakes." "Noted. I want drama, tears, maybe a marching band. You'll get fireworks, literal ones. And if I say no," Avery smirked, "I'll ask again the next day." Persistent billionaire energy. You love it. I love you. Say it again. I love you. Louder. Sloane leaned in. I love you. Avery Lockhart. More than I've ever loved anything in my life. Avery pulled her close. Then let's live like it every damn day. They did. Years later, no one would talk about how the millionaire took a homeless woman to her ex-fiance's wedding. They talk about what came after. The studio Sloane opened for women with nowhere to go. The foundation Avery built with no intention of being the face of it. The love they made visible in every room they walked into. And how against everything, reputation, scandal, fear, legacy, they chose each other over and over again. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that was the difference that made everything matter. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $ icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.